Good luck to all of the participants.
Absolutely, that is the field for today. And I believe the action just got underway. I was gonna go through the pairings. I'm gonna have to try, and for now, Alex, I'm sorry, you'll have to start without the mouse, because I will try to cut out the cameras of the players so that you guys can see Magnus and his opponent, Rasmus Svane.
Yeah, so Rasmus Svane, born in Denmark, but he has been representing Germany for a long time. He is top 10 in Germany, and at the moment he's gone for a Caro Can with the black pieces, a variation that is very, very popular, but it's been essayed by Magnus himself. Black accepts these double pawns on the F-file, but on the other hand gets a very, very solid position. Now what White is doing, Magnus, he is trading everything off. F3, controlling against the threat of checkmate on G2. He's trading everything off. He considers, if I can get into an endgame, my better pawn structure will give me the better chances. Bringing that knight on D2, pawn to B5 prevents the knight from getting into the C4 square. And White now goes queen E5, insisting on the strategy of offering the exchanges. Black accepts the exchange. Now the double pawns have come off for Black, but White does have a slightly better king. B4 covering the C5 square. We're probably going to see a C4 break. That's what we see. White is going to want to swap off the pawns on B5 more than likely. And then after doing that, likely go and attack those pawns. And I think White is dominating here. 94, 96, the pawn on B5 drops. The knight comes back, 94 check, and I think we're going to see a resignation here very, very soon, because here this king and pawn endgame is, or this pawn endgame is hopelessly lost. Already Magnus with a queen, and he kicks off with a victory, the favorite getting off to a very strong start. Black will need to score here, and we see Magnus essaying a very interesting opening here with F6, knight H6, knight F7. So he's just going to try and have fun and play some unusual variations, and we'll see what Rasmus does against this. Black now has these pawns on E5 and F5. They can be a little bit weak, but on the other hand, as Black, you're quite happy that you've got a space advantage in the center. Black's already going for an aggressive variation, F4, pressing in the center. Will we see F3 at some point, grabbing more space and kicking the bishop back? Knight G5, a very strong move. Has this been missed by Magnus? Magnus gives an exchange, and Rasmus actually in great shape. He picks up a pawn. Rasmus in the center. Magnus picks up a pawn in exchange on A2. We see rook D8. 92 check is the threat here with the X-ray on the rook on D1. And Rasmus sidesteps this. Bishop F7, preventing rook E8, probably wanting to keep the rooks on the board if possible. Rook B8, Magnus has to go passive. Rook D7, we're looking at rook E7, knight on F5, stops that. Bishop E4, trying to kick that, lots of tactics. Rook E8, rook on E1 is now defended after king F1, but will we see bishop C4 check or anything like this? I think bishop D3 is there. Magnus's biggest advantage is he's got time on the clock, but bishop takes H7, nice tactic. If you take the bishop, the rook on E8 would hang, and this is excellent from Rasmus, fantastic game so far, and in fact Magnus is in serious trouble. He's got a completely lost endgame and he resigns. So that's a huge game. These are short matches. We're looking at the first person to 6.5, and Magnus whipping out the moves here. H5, a very interesting move. Magnus certainly feels confident in the endgames. He's known as maybe the best player of all time, perhaps, but certainly his name is up there when it comes to best endgame player of all time as well. So he's taking the game to an endgame. We're seeing bishop E3 and B4 trying to push back those knights. The knight on A6 is not looking really ideal here. We're seeing knight D2 completing the development. I like Magnus's position. We might see a break with pawn to A5 at some point soon. But Magnus, for the first time, going into the tank. One thing that's interesting about his German opponent, he's keeping very, very well, doing very well on the clock against him. The A file has opened up. That's in White's favor. Pressure on B6 pawn. Now we're seeing pawn to B5, and that's it. That's going to be game over. The knight is lost. You could not move it without losing the rook on A8. Rasmus is continuing to play. Why not? This is bullet. But against Magnus, it's unlikely to work. We'll see what happens soon. Magnus playing F5, grabbing space and also opening up lines, and importantly kicking the knight back from the defensive C5. Knight repositions to E4. We're seeing defensive G3 and pressure on F6. That's an extra piece we can take on F6 with check. Magnus does not go for that, but there are various ways to convert this. He's just going to push the queenside pawn, advance the king, maybe king B5, advancing further, and pawn to C6, I expect. No, he goes for the greedy option, grabbing the pawn. Why not? Black's only counterplay is this pawn on E4, but the knight on F3 controls that square. Knight H3, knight F4 check. We're going to see the pawn drop, and Magnus actually just swaps off everything, and as in the first game, liquidates into a winning queen and pawn again. But wait a second, Magnus came very, very close there to losing control. Maybe unnecessary what he allowed there, but it was actually always just by one tempo, but always actually ultimately in control. So that's 2-1. And so far we've seen the white player win each and every time in these first 3 games.
Guys, apologies. We're gonna stick, I believe, to just Magnus's camera. For the next matches, there will be more time to figure this out, but not as easy as I thought on the fly. But here is Magnus, and hopefully people are happy to see the king. So, sorry, back to the chess, Alex.
No problem. So here we're seeing that black seems to have gotten in a very, very nice position here. We're seeing already up a pawn, and in addition to being up a pawn, black's position is just beautiful here. The bishop on g2 is crashing into nothing. He's got more space. Definitely white is really up against this. f5 and f4 is already problems for this rook on c3. Threatening a pawn, but Magnus isn't concerned. Queen g3 ideas are going to immediately threaten queen h2, followed up by ideas like bishop g3. That's why white sacrifices an exchange here on d6. We're seeing Magnus continuing the attack. Bishop takes h3 is possible, and after bishop f2 you can keep the pressure on, or you can just liquidate into an endgame. Magnus deciding to keep the pressure on. He might go for a check. Now ultimately he exchanges everything. We're seeing a4 and rook c8. Very hard to defend this pawn, so you're down in exchange and you're down material. Rook c3 going for the a3 pawn. We're going to see this pawn on a4 drop very soon. King takes f4, not possible because of g5, and that was brutal. Magnus winning a crucial game there. Rasmus needed to win in order to equalize the match. Now he's up against a 3-1 Magnus with the white pieces.
Yeah, a strong start from the world champion, who today will be looking, and I think we lost his camera. Okay, Alex, I'll let you take care of the game.
We're flying
again.
free once again without the mouse. So we've got seven pawns each so far, and Magnus is putting the pressure into in the center. I really like Magnus's position. He's castling into a somewhat open king with those pawns advanced, but it's no big deal. He's got the bishop on g2, he's got the queen on f3. The knight on h5 isn't really playing for now. Black goes queen b6 for some pressure on the queen side, bishop e5, tying in with that, but the center falls with the pawn on d5. We see the pawn on f2 under fire. Knight g3, a nice tactic. Did Magnus miss that tactic? My impression is he did. Now the bishop takes f2, the pawn drops, the knight is defended, the knight goes back, and now this knight is going to be much more active. Queen c7 threats, and this is not a situation that you want. Rook e3, huge move there. Queen takes e3, are we going to see some knight f4? But Magnus calls his bluff. He says, in fact, there isn't anything here, you just gave up an exchange, maybe you have a draw, but you're not going to be able to do more than that. On the other hand, actually, the problem with king h3 was knight f4 check was coming in, and in fact, turns out Rasmus says, I did have more than that. That's a huge result. 3-2. A convincing win with the black pieces, and Rasmus showing that he can hang with the world number one.
Absolutely. Very impressive start from Rasmus. Rasmus, actually, the reason he is up against Magnus Carlsen, the pairing system, the knockout bracket was done based on their standings in the qualifiers, and Rasmus qualified with the lowest score out of everyone. That's why he got the chance, or the mal chance, to be up against Magnus, but definitely holding his own so far. Yeah,
incredible stuff, and in this position here, Magnus will be happy. I think he's got that queenside pawn majority. He's got more space, but for the time being, it's not. White is also in the game. On the other hand, when you have the white pieces, you have that added pressure. Black might go g6. He's not concerned about any sacrifices. Bishop c4. The queen is now going to have to be passive in order to defend this. Instead, he offers bishop d3. We don't see an exchange. Maybe we're going to see queen d5 piling on the pressure here, and white has to go passive. On the other hand, that bishop is still influential along this diagonal. We're seeing queen takes d4. Black broke with b4, breaking up that queen-side structure, and I think Magnus is really putting the pressure in this particular variation. Can we see something like g5, or will he consider that a bit too risky? Magnus is going to the tank. Queen f5 ideas would then threaten checkmate. It's hard to say. He does go for g5. The question is, what is he going to do here? He moves the bishop, preparing queen check, will be met by king f8. But this is somewhat risky territory. Will he, for example, give a check here with the queen on d1? He wants those queens off the board. Will white grab this pawn? The problem is queen check and the bishop will fall. On the other hand, bishop here, we're seeing queen h7 check, accelerating, preventing everything. We might see bishop f8 just consolidating and block with the queen on g6, queen e5. Magnus desperately, he's up a piece, desperately wants to exchange. He succeeds. Bishop d5, queen e4 is coming in. Best case scenario for white, apart from the clock situation, is a draw by repetition. That's what he's going for with the queen, but Magnus's king will escape, and now the queen's come off the board. King f5, queen even stays. It's all about the clock situation. Magnus is under pressure, but will he checkmate? I believe he will. Let's see it. It's 1 second.
Oh, he doesn't get there.
That could be huge, and we see Magnus. He's not particularly happy.
My apologies, guys. I don't know why the Zoom call keeps jumping around. I'll try and fix it while I let you keep looking at the games, Alex.
Yeah, so in this game now, Magnus keeps, in spite of that result, he keeps a convincing 2-game lead. We're 4.5 against, 3.5 against 2.5, a 1-game lead. And yeah, the question is, what will happen in this particular game here? It's pretty close. Black, on the other hand, white has, Magnus has the white pieces, queen e4, huge move. You're threatening mate on h7 and the bishop on d4. He goes in a different direction. Here, rook to d1, queen f5 we're seeing. Queen h7 is not a threat, but the knight on f6 is tied down. King h2 trying to fix the king problems. Maybe we'll see some rook to e1, offering 2 rooks for the queen. Black goes for that, but the rook on c8. The rook on c8 was hanging with check. Not taken. That's a huge miss from Magnus, as far as I can tell, unless there was something there, but I don't believe so. White now goes bishop c2, trying to reroute that bishop to b3. And we're seeing white, black is hanging on, but the huge threat of checkmate here with queen to h8. What will black do? Black goes rook e8, but we've got queen g8 and the pawn on g7 drops. The pawn on g6 is very strong. The white queen and the bishop should combine very well, and that is actually going to be a queen here, costing an exchange. Black is going to try to hang on, but the big problem is this g pawn here. What can you do to stop it and to prevent it costing you more material? Black is trying, but that's it. It's going to be game over. That's a second queen on the board. Resign time. That's a monster game. We're seeing 4.5, 2.5, and Magnus is potentially just 2 games away from victory.
There is so much happening in the early stages. We have the Magnus comeback. Also, we should say the format is it's a best of 12 games, which means that Magnus is now 2 points away from the magical 6.5 points mark. 2 points away from qualifying to the quarterfinals. Also, this stress situation will only be for the first rounds. From the quarterfinals, there will be one match after another. They will not play simultaneously. So good news for you guys and for us as well.
So for this particular game here, we're seeing Rasmus is really up against it, and we're seeing a very similar position to b4 with the light square bishops off the board. That means black has no real problems about getting checkmated. But on the other hand, I like white's activity. Rook f7 is a kind of a way to offer a draw here. If white goes back, will black go rook f7, or will he push his luck with queen f7?
And white feels like he has to play on.
Yeah, Rasmus is indicating no draw here, and that makes sense because the black king looks a lot less safe than the white king. Black again seeking that exchange of the queens, and rook e7 a nice touch when you exchange. This pawn on c6 drops though. You cannot take here because there was a checkmate on e8, very quickly spotted by the players. Queen e4. Now Magnus is the one trying to force a perpetual, and in this case white says still no thank you to that. White has some checks. He goes instead in a different direction, and that allows the perpetual. So that's a good result, good practical result. Absolutely. For Magnus.
Now 1.5 point away. There was a question in the chat, what happens if it's tied 6-6? They will draw colors and then they will play until one person wins one game. So that's the way it will work. Okay, so Magnus now 1.5.
I'm loving Magnus's position here.
Me too.
He's got a lot of pressure. Maybe at some point he can get g4, g5 in. Rook here inviting e5 ideas, but I think the point is knight b5, the queen would be hanging, so you can escape the x-ray. Now e5 is played, but with the bishop here it's not a big deal. The queen is not being x-rayed. We're going to see white having to move his queen. He goes for queen e3.
Maybe some knight h6 in the air at some point.
For sure. Maybe he'll keep the rooks. He goes in a different direction. Full board vision, but black is attacking both pieces. Will we see a retreat of the knight or bishop to c2? This move is very, very awkward for white to deal with. He goes for bishop c2. Now the bishops come off, queen d1 is prevented, Queen d2 can invade, but white actually suddenly very dominant, very much in control here. He could go for a repetition. He had the option, but he didn't go for that. He went for queen c2. Magnus wants to almost end the match with this particular game, and he's in great shape. He's up 2 pawns.
Absolutely. One win here will take him very, very close. He is pushing, but I'm curious if he has... I'm still curious about that game where he didn't manage to win with the queen, where he didn't manage to checkmate in time. Because Magnus, we have seen him before. He really has the speed usually. Apparently Penguin is already through, very impressive. And let's see, as soon as this match is over, we'll update you on the other results.
Desperation there, and very, very nice conversion there from Magnus. And 6-3. This is an absolute must-win situation for Rasmus, not where you want to be. Although Magnus is taking some liberties in the opening here. He's toying a little bit with his opponent perhaps, because this is not what you usually want to do. And look at where the king is. The king and queen do not start like this.
Where is that king going?
He's gone for like the bomb cloud. He went for some kind of bomb cloud here. And this is simply incredible for Magnus, who keeps a straight face, but not quite what you want potentially your final game to be. So let's see, can Rasmus punish the liberties that the world champion is taking?
Apparently Opperwesen is true as well, which is a huge result for him. We'll update all the results. Magnus only needs a draw here. Took some liberties in the opening, but looks like he got away with it.
He's setting up a fortress here of sorts for the man who said he does not believe in fortresses.
My apologies, guys. We're gonna have to look at the end of this match. The problem with the Zoom call, if you have used Zoom, people are coming and leaving, and it makes our job quite difficult. So let's see, after this match, there shall be no more issues. Apology about that. And let's look at this final game.
Yeah, black I think is actually in great shape here. The position is completely closed, and white almost wants black to take this pawn so that he can generate some activity on the A file. But black is now in...
Oh, that's a big
mouse slip! Huge mouse slip and immediate resignation. Will that spell the difference? Magnus, he was in cruise control.
Such a pity we lost the camera at the worst possible time. Let's try and bring it back for the last... Let's try and bring Magnus back for the last game.
That is the one thing that could have saved Rasmus in that particular game, and it happened. Magnus will need to recover here. He's got the white pieces though, and of course, you know, when you're used to playing chess at the absolute highest levels, I don't think that Magnus is going to be too fazed by something like that. Absolutely.
We almost had him, but then the camera jumped again. It's so close. How's the game going?
So Magnus seems to be in a nice position here with a really strong knight on d6. That's actually, the position has now changed. The white knights have shifted to b3 and c4, back onto d6, using all of these squares. Black is on the defensive. Again, white has a bunch of extra space. The one thing that black might use in this position, though, the bishop on a7 is quite strong. And we wonder, can you not take on e5, collapse the center, and now the position is getting very, very messy. Those knights looking for stability. Black is the one finally here with a better center. But on the other hand, this pawn on g5 can fall at any moment, and white is going to have two passed pawns. Black is rolling up the board with c4, but rook check, and rook check picks up the rook. And I think that this is going to be it. Yes, you have these 2 pawns, but white should be able to blockade them. And importantly, white has this pawn. He's making already a queen here. And I think we're just going to see Magnus converting in a variety of ways. He goes for the more practical choice, doesn't even want to let black promote. d3 is not an option. The d3 square is super well covered here. And white now is shifting. He just has to make sure no more mouse slips. Rook takes c2, that's 1 pawn gone. e4, you can take that one as well. You can take d4 on the next one with check. You can even exchange everything. Game over. And match over. Magnus goes through. Magnus
does not look too impressed. We will leave the camp for now. But let's see who else is still playing. Where can we go?